Hi, this is Zoro the Drummer, and you're listening to the Nothing Shocking Podcast.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking Podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Unteed, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking Podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers, like our Facebook page, or follow us on X at No Shock Pod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking Podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Zoro the Drummer. He's been touring drummer and session player for a host of artists, but he's releasing in April Maria's Scarf, Story of a Mother's Love.
It's his memoir. Hey, fantastic interview. Let's get to it.
All right, good night.
Good night. All right, Zoro, welcome to the Nothing Shocking Podcast. I'd like to introduce you, my co-host, Jeff Unteed.
Zoro, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you. Thank you for wanting to do this with us tonight. So let's get right into this. Before we get into your career as a musician, you're a notable author now. So this coming, April 30th of 2024, you'll be releasing the book, Maria's Scarf, a memoir of your mother's love and son's perseverance and dreaming big. Talk a little bit more about this whole creative journey for this new book.
Yes, well, this book has been in the process. I'm 61 years old, and in a way you could say I've actually been writing it my entire life, or at least for 50 years. I started a diary when I was 10 years old that I kept up from the age of 10 into my early 20s. And then 30 years ago, I decided I wanted to start writing my life story. Actually, like 45 years ago, I just decided I want to start writing my life story. So I just began to write down little vignettes. They were little one-sentence things, tell the story of this, tell the story of that. That morphed into like a badly written paragraph and then a badly written page. It just kind of evolved, but it was something that never left me. But I've actually been working on it for the last 15 years very solidly, and I've read over 300 books to study how to write memoir and to study the craft. So this has really been kind of this particular book is like a lifelong vision come to life.
Very good. When it comes to writing a memoir, like a lifelong vision like this, it always fascinates me with each artist that we've talked to that have written books. Yeah. What stories are pertinent that you have to include, and then when do you get to that point of, okay, this story is not necessary? You want to put it in there, but you just don't have enough room for it. How does it work for you?
Well, so that's what studying the craft has been all about. Like in reading like 300 different books on writing in the last 15 years, and also studying other memoirs that are well written. One of the things they always say is, you've got to There's a book on writing. It says, delete unnecessary words. Well, you have to do the same thing with stories. There's a lot of stories that were great standalone stories, but they're not helping to move the story forward. So they just kind of send you off on a wild goose chase. And you kind of start discerning that as you spend more time reading and studying how other people do it. And then I had different great editors along the way, different friends that are great writers, and they would read what I wrote, and they would say, this story's great, but it's not pertinent to the theme of the overall theme of the book, And just like in movies, there's a lot of scenes that are left on the cutting room floor because when they film them, it seems like it's a good idea, and then when they look at the whole thing as a whole, they go, this is not helping to move the narrative forward. So there's a saying that William Faulkner, a writer, famous writer, said. He goes, kill all your darlings, which means don't get married to anything that you wrote, no matter how beautiful the passage is or the chapter or the section. You might be in love with it. You might have spent 6 months or 2 years working on it. But if it does not serve the overall purpose of the story, you've got to kill your darlings. You've got to cut it. And so that's a kind of a brutal task for a lot of authors and actors. But I've learned to do it, and I was really brutal with the whole editing process.
Wow. Well, can you talk a little bit about that relationship with your mom and what got you into music?
Well, so I was raised by a single mother. She was an immigrant from Mexico City, and she raised 7 children alone. With no fathers were ever in the scene. So it was a very difficult upbringing. I mean, for her, it had to be incredibly more hard than I could even imagine, even though I lived it with her, but I wasn't the mother, right? Trying to shuffle all these kids and make a life. But I had this mother who had this really strong, irrepressible spirit, and she was tenacious, but she was also tender-hearted at the same time. But she absolutely loved music, and music is what kind of soothed her soul, and music is what inspired her. She would kind of live her life through the lyric of different songs. So she would put different songs on for me when I was young, and she would recite the lyrics, and that kind of got me into being a dreamer, and had to be a dreamer because the circumstances I was living in growing up in Compton as a kid, you had to be a dreamer to imagine yourself out of there doing something better. But she had this dreamer-like spirit and was just this really enthusiastic soul. I've met lots of people in my 61 years, and not just because she's my mother, but I've never met anyone that just had this unstoppable spirit that she had and just was always upbeat and optimistic, even through all the trials and tribulations. So, and because I didn't grow up in a traditional family, like most people that I know, they had grandparents. They had 4. I had none out of the 4 possible in my life. And most people I know had uncles and aunts. I never had any uncles or aunts near me, never had any cousins near me. So the only people I grew up with was my mother and my 6 other siblings, and that was it. So we were a very tight-knit family, and my mother's influence on me, when people meet me, they're kind of meeting her, because her spirit is very strong in me. She was very positive, very upbeat, very motivating, and I had a super, if it weren't for her, I would have never made it in music, and I probably wouldn't have the passion for music that I do, because she was very passionate about everything she was into. So yeah, with no father in the scene, there's no other influences. The only influence of an adult was my mother. My oldest brother was 13 years older than me, and so my whole family did love music, so they played lots of different music growing up, and all those styles influenced my love for music and direction of music.
Oh, very good. I want to bring this back to your writing. I had a college professor that was big on when writing anything, that you remove jargonous situations from your writing. And for you, when you were writing your memoir, how hard was it for you to stay focused and leave that maybe jargonous type of writing out of your creative writing process here? Because creating a memoir has got to be probably the hardest thing to write.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's literally the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, writing the memoir. And initially, 15 years ago, I never thought I was going to write it. I was going to hire a writer and just tell my story. but I couldn't get. I had many publishers that were interested in it then, the acquisitions editors, but then it was always turned down by the sales and marketing team. So had I gotten a book deal back then, the writer would have written it and I would have told him my stories. But looking back now, from a 61-year-old's perspective, I'm so glad that it didn't come out then, because in between the years of 45 and 60, you grow a lot, and I grew as a writer, and I grew I had thicker skin where I could handle like cutting out the jargon, cutting out stories that weren't pertinent. I started to see, from being a musician, just like you don't use every drum fill, in the recording, you don't want to have too many fills. You want to have just the right ones. And when I've seen other producers and how they worked, and I've seen how movies work and what, studied what they left on the cutting room floor, I could see, all these things, as hard as it is, makes it better. So it wasn't so hard by the time I got to this stage, because the really brunt of the writing was really in the last few years, kind of like during COVID. And so I try to write it in a way that anybody could read it. It's 120,000 words, so it's approximately like 400 pages. But the last editor that Blackstone Publishing brought in for me, what she was really good at was streamlining and taking things and making them move faster and pace faster. So by that time, I had understood like everything they're doing is not against me; it's to make it better. So I just kind of let her make her cuts, unless it was something really drastic. I was like, okay, she knows what she's doing. She's done hundreds of books. So at some point, you have to let it go so that it can be better. Less is more, in that setting. But it's funny. I turned in a 110,000 word book. The finished book is actually 120,000, but it reads faster. It's actually longer. But, you guys have watched movies, right?
Yeah.
A bad movie that's 90 minutes is longer than a 3-hour movie that's riveting.
Amen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But you
right? You watch Lord of the Rings and you're glued to it. But a bad
Exactly.
movie in 90 minutes feels like a 3-hour movie. So everything in writing is about pacing and about things moving along so the reader doesn't go, oh, God, we're going on and on about, and there's a fine line. And it's the same thing with songs, Like I've learned, like as a writer, it's almost exactly the same skill as a drummer. The same process, but the skill set is different. In other words, when you become a drummer, you have to learn the vocabulary. You have to learn all the vocabulary of what it is to be a drummer and have a vast vocabulary to draw from. And then when you first start off as a writer or drummer, you're overplaying. You're using too many words. You're taking too long to say something that could be said shorter. And you make all the common mistakes that everybody makes when they're starting off as an artist. Then as you grow, you realize with writing, you have to have short sentences. You have to have medium-length sentences. You have to have long sentences. If everything is a medium sentence, it becomes monotone and boring. And the same thing with drumming. You have to have quick fills, a short one, a 2-bar, a 1-bar, and everything is the same. It's just a different vocabulary, the musical words and the written words. But being a musician and having the skill of knowing how to play helped me to become a better writer, because I realized it's got to have that kind of flow like drumming does, and it's got to have a variety of things that move it along. And then the bottom line is that drumming and writing is the same, and movies, it's all the same. You have one job as an artist, and it's only one. And that is to elicit emotion, make people feel something deeply, strongly, whether it's hate, whether it's vengeance, whether it's love, whether it's forgiveness, but make them feel. And my job as a drummer has always been the same, and I realized later in writing that my job was this. It took years to understand that, but they're really the same thing, but you're just doing it in a different skill set.
You brought up an interesting point about writing during the COVID-19 lockdown, and we've spoke to many artists about their songwriting and artists that were writing books during the COVID-19 mitigations. And some felt like it was an inspiring time, and then others felt like they had a difficult time getting inspired during the lockdown. Right. For you, writing this memoir, did you find the COVID-19 mitigations to be inspiring to get this book going?
I found that it gave me the time And that in itself is inspiring, because I'm the kind of a guy that I've always learned, because of the upbringing I had, the difficult circumstances, having lived in a car, moved 40 times by the time I was in the 4th grade, many times with our radio red flyer wagon. I mean, I grew up in harsh conditions, hungry, all these things. So I have always learned to see the glass half full. And because of my mother's optimistic nature, I always go, okay, what can I get done during this downtime? For instance, when I was touring with Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons, spent several years touring with Frankie. That's the Jersey Boys guy, and I would go to rehearsals all the time at his house in Calabasas. And out of the 4 hours, about three and a half of it was like vocal rehearsals. And I don't sing, so I'm just sitting there. Yeah. So one day I just was like, I can't sit here for 3.5 hours. I just pulled out my laptop and started working on a different book. That was my previous book called The Big Gig. And I got so much of that book written during those rehearsals. I had so much of it written during plane flights. So I've always learned to kind of make the most of whatever the worst situation is and go, what can I do? How can I maximize something that other people would just be mad about and not make any progress? And that came from the desperation of my childhood. Like, how do we move all of our furniture from one apartment to the next with a radio red flyer wagon when we don't have a U-Haul or a car? And then you get very creative and you just learn survival. You learn to make do with what you have. It's very funny. Like in New Zealand, and there's a movie called The World's Fastest Indian with Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, yeah.
But it's about this. Yeah, you know the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so what I love about the New Zealanders is they have to be creative with things because they're so far from anywhere else in the world that a lot of times they don't get things over there or they don't get them very fast. So they have to be creative. So your circumstances sort of dictate a lot of what your life becomes, right? And so for me, I just go, hey, I'm going to make the most of COVID by using all that downtime to just write. And so I just learned to get into the zone no matter where I'm at. I wrote a lot of my memoir, Maria's Scarf, at the gym where I work out, and I would just go there with the laptop. And I was doing that in the summer. I was sitting around by the pool during COVID because no one was really allowed in the gym. And I would get there really early, set up one of those cabana things, and work until it got too hot, until the laptop got too hot and the sun got too hot. But every day I would go there for like 4 hours and just write, And I'm not one to I never really watch the news much. I don't like to get distracted by all the chaos going in the world because 99% of it I can't change anyway. So I go, I'm just going to focus on not getting freaked out and living in fear. I'm just going to write my book. And that's what I did.
Very good.
Yeah. Well, I noticed on your website you had a kind of a companion piece to Maria's Scarf was a playlist where I believe you took songs that either you talked about in the book or songs that were probably meaningful to you. Can you talk a little bit about building that playlist and what goes into what goes into that?
Well, first of all, every title of the book has 46 chapters, and every chapter title is named after a song.
Nice.
And so I tried to pick songs that sort of depicted the theme of the chapter. For instance, there's a chapter early on in the book, and I call it "I Feel the Earth Move," which is a Carole King song. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky come falling down. So that particular chapter, there's an earthquake that happens in L.A. in the 60s in Sylmar. It's the famous Sylmar earthquake, and that's what causes us to. That's the catalyst for why we decided to move to Grants Pass, Oregon. And so I just call that chapter "I Feel the Earth Move." So every chapter it has a song name that's kind of in the period. I did the best I could to stick into the period if I could, and then more or less the theme of that. So like when we're living in the car, I call that "Living on a Prayer." Very appropriate, right? And so, but I mentioned many songs throughout the book because songs were such an instrumental part of our life and my mother's life. And she took me to see Frank Sinatra when I was 12 years old. So every song that's mentioned in the book, I thought it would be really cool to create a playlist in the exact order. Because I had some friends, advanced readers, that read the book, and I had this one woman, and she was from Denmark, and she goes, I didn't grow up with any of this kind of music. And she goes, I feel so like I want to know what those songs sound like that you're talking about. I want to know that music. And so I got the idea yes, not everybody knows every song I'm talking about. I mean, some people will know some people will know others, but they won't all know them all. So I thought I can take them on a really beautiful musical journey. I mean, after all, I am a musician, and my mother loved music, and this is, even though it's a mother-son story first, a family story second, and third, a story of a kid wanting to become a musician, music was the thread that held our family together. And you guys, I know that you guys love music too.
Yeah.
Just think about it. When you listen to a song on the radio, it transports you spiritually and mentally and physically. I mean, you know where you were when that song was out in junior high. You know where you lived. You know what your bicycle looked like. Like, songs make this imprint on your soul that books can't even do and movies can't even do. But songs make you remember everything that was going on in your life during that time. So they have this it's the strongest medium we have. And so I thought it'd be very cool for the reader to go, yeah, I don't know this song he's talking about. And then, bam, you go and listen to it and you go, that's why she liked that so much. Or that's what that drum, like there's a song that I reference in the book by Buddy Rich, who was considered the world's greatest drummer. He was a big band drummer in the 40s, 50s. He lived all the way into the 80s. Anyway, he was a legend. He was like the GOAT, the greatest of all time. But anyway, a lot of people don't know who he is because unless you're a drummer and studied that, you might not know. And so you go listen to this and you go, holy smokes. Now I see how that inspired Zoro, So I thought it was fun, but that was the most fun I've had, was like creating that playlist for Maria's Scarf. I thought this is going to be really cool. I think it's like over 5 hours of music or something.
Oh wow,
that's awesome.
In 2016, you released your fourth book, SOAR: 9 Proven Ways to Unlock Your Limitless Potential. Talk a little bit more about this endeavor.
Yeah, so SOAR was like kind of a life manual. There are some of my stories in there, but it's not written like a memoir. It's written like a motivational book, like a John Maxwell book or a Tony Robbins book, in the sense that it's like principles. So the whole premise of that book was there's 3 things I think we're on this planet to do. We are here. We have to discover the gifts that we've been given. We're on a discovery path to go, what do I have that's unique? Then after we discover it, we have to develop that gift that we have. And then the eventual goal is, after you develop it, is to deploy the gift. In other words, to use it, to make some kind of a difference, to make a life with that gift. So these were sort of nine keys to, like, how do we unlock the potential that we have to maximize and be everything we were created to be. And so I just for instance, there's a chapter in there that's called B-E, and they're all very short names. Like, one chapter's Bend. So for B, for instance, you're never going to be the fullness, you're never going to reach your full potential unless you embrace the uniqueness of you and really embrace being who you are. For instance, I'm a drummer, but there's millions of other drummers in the world, at least hundreds of thousands in the world, right? So the only way I'm going to be the best I can be is to embrace what's unique about me. Now, in the beginning, you learn from everyone else. You learn from the masters, and you copy. That's what all people do. But eventually, it has to morph into your own uniqueness that's you, where Michael Jackson was a good example of that, where if you really study and know Michael's history, he was influenced by these 2 dancers called the Nicholas Brothers. He was influenced by Fred Astaire, by Frank Sinatra, by James Brown. He was influenced by all of them, and there was bits and pieces of all those guys in Michael. But eventually, it all morphed into Michael. So it's the same thing with Michelangelo and all the masters. They studied from all the masters that preceded them. But so the way you're going to make the biggest mark on this world is to embrace, like, what makes me me? Yes, I have little influences from this person, that person, but then I've got to embrace me. And whenever you're not doing that, you're never being the fullness of who you're supposed to be. So the other principle in there is like Bend, B-E-N-D. And what I mean by that is the road to becoming a successful creative person, and we're all creative. I mean, the road to reaching your potential, rather, because not everybody's going to make money, not everybody's going to be famous, but it's not about that. If you're a school teacher and you want to be the best possible teacher you can, well, you've got to reach your potential and learn just like anyone else. So that whole concept of bending is that when people have a vision or a dream and they're headed in a certain direction, and then what happens is discouragement comes. and you get rejected and things get turned down, and then that's where you have to learn to bend, because if you don't bend, you'll quit. And so the analogy that I wrote is like this: like if you look at a hurricane and you see in the news when a hurricane or a tornado hits like an oak tree is a very dense wood, and it's brittle, it doesn't bend, so it cracks. And I gave the analogy that most people are like that. When disappointment comes, they don't bend. But the idea is to be like a palm tree. The wood is more supple, and you'll see that in a hurricane or a tornado, the palm tree sways with the winds, with the hurricanes, and that's the people who learn how to bend when things don't go their way. You can still get to that destination, but it's not going to look like the straight line you thought it was. So my heart is always to take what I've learned and to show other people what this process looks like and how you do it, because there's a process to everything. And so, for instance, Maria's Scarf, which will come out April 30th, my memoir, that was turned down over 100 times in 15 years between publishers, agents, and a lot of times it was publishers wanted to publish it, the editors did, but the sales team turned it down because whatever, I didn't have 2 billion followers or whatever. They want something that's easy. They want another hit book by somebody who's already sold 2 million. So it's been turned down 100 times in 15 years. And but I know the vision that I had, and I refuse to let anything stop that from coming to life. But I'm glad that it took this long, because it would never be the book that it's going to become now 15 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So you have to have patience. You have to really believe in what you're doing. And then the other thing I would say is, we all have a vision, but then how many people are willing to go back to the drawing board? You always have to retool, reassess, recalibrate, reboot the vision, because in the process of creating anything, you'll find out this is not as good as I thought it was, or I ran into a hiccup with the machinery, or people aren't getting what I'm saying in this passage. And this is where people give up, because they go, oh, that's going to be like a lot more work. Yeah, I've had thousands of iterations of this book, but I promise you, when you read it, when you guys get the chance to actually read the whole thing, you'll be inspired, you'll be touched, you'll be moved. But that's only because of the 15 years of the work and the retooling and the recasting.
Oh, very good.
That's exciting. I know on your website you also do drum lessons and career consulting and life coaching. Did those endeavors lead you to writing the SOAR 9, or after writing the book did you turn towards those careers?
They kind of all evolved. It's kind of like, you'll see great directors in Hollywood that first started off as actors, right? Like an example would be Ron Howard is a famous director, but he started in a TV show called Happy Days so he started off as an actor. Yeah. So I started off as a drummer, but I would say simultaneously in my DNA was always a teacher and always an encourager. That existed, and actually, when I think about it, a writer, because writing in my diary, I had no idea, and there are many diary entries in the memoir from a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 21-year-old, that I never wrote thinking I was going to have a memoir. I was just writing my true feelings. Some of them will make you laugh your butt off, others will make you cry, others will make you feel deeply, but all these things were kind of always emanating out of me. And when I got my first gig with the New Edition in 1985, my first really, really big tour, I immediately was speaking. I immediately wanted to speak at underprivileged schools and to boys' clubs. And I immediately wanted to champion the dreams of others, because I was that underdog. And I know, and also growing up without a father, I know what people instinctively needed to hear, because it was what I always wanted to hear but never did hear. And so I decided, well, let me be that voice for those other people. And so, so the speaking kind of coexisted with the drumming at first. And then, the writing kind of came out of starting to write some articles. I started to write some articles in the fan magazines. So I was a teen star, believe it or not, in those days, the New Edition days and Bobby Brown days. I was literally Black Teen of the Month, white teen of the month, and Latin teen of the month. I was all of those.
Yeah.
I was everyday people, and so that led to them that led to me having a big following. And so kids would write in and say, "Hey, how did you make it as a drummer? How do you make it in showbiz?" So one of the magazines said, "Hey, can you write an article about how you make it in showbiz?" And so I wrote an article called Zoro's Showbiz Tips, and it was like a 6 or 8 page, pretty in-depth article of, how like a musician made it and how I made it.
Yeah.
That became the framework 30 years later for what became the Big Gig book, which was a 440-page book. But I trace it all back to that article because that was like the structure and the foundation. The other thing is all the books that I wrote, with the exception of the Memoir, because I wrote a lot of drum books too that became standards in the industry. Every book that I wrote was honestly a book I was looking for in my younger days that I would have never wrote if somebody else had already written it. When I first came to L.A. in 1980 to try to make it in the music business, I was 18 years old, and I didn't know how it worked. I'm like, how does a young musician meet the right people? How do you get a big gig with somebody? Like, there was no manual on it, and I looked in every bookstore, and it was always books on, like, how to get a record deal or how contracts work for a record company. But that wasn't anything about, like, how a player gets auditions for big gigs and how you go on tour. There was no manuals on that. And so I always said, one day when I make it, I'm going to write that book to help all those people to understand how this works. And so I've always written books and all my R&B drumming books were books I wish somebody else had wrote, but no one was honoring R&B the way it should have been. They were honoring jazz and rock and roll, but they always left. R&B was like the bastard child of the music industry. Never any history written about it. Not a lot of great films and documentaries or concert footage of all the R&B groups in the 60s and 70s. And so I thought, one day I'm going to write a book to honor all the guys that I loved. And I did, and it helped put all those guys back on the map, and a lot of them end up getting to do drum clinics and all kinds of things they never had a chance to do before the book came out. So I'd always, but the writing sort of coexisted, from those articles. Everything was sort of a natural evolution of from one thing to the next. But I'll tell you this, I've never done anything in my life for money. I've only done what I was compelled to do. In other words, I wrote these drum books, and they took so much energy and so much work. And if I were to just analyze how much time it took versus the money I made, it was a super poor investment. But I got to change a lot of drummers' lives, and I got to help my heroes become more famous than they should have always been. And I got to teach all around the world on these things that I loved. That was my passion. So, and same with Maria's Scarf, like thousands and thousands of dollars spent on editors and proposals and graphic people just to keep repitching it and retooling it, sending out tons of advanced copies to people to get blurbs long before it was published, and just all these things. I've always done things that I felt I have to do, no matter if anybody buys it or not, if it ever sees the light of day. I have to do these things because they're inside of me to do. And so it just so happened that everything that I did like that eventually did succeed on some level, and I really measure success differently than most people. If I could have influenced and inspired somebody greatly through my drumming, through my speaking, through my teaching, through my writing, then I've already succeeded, regardless of how much money it made or what fame it got, because most people don't spend their life making a difference. The world is a very self-centered place, and so I always say, there's 2 ways to live your life. You either live a life of self or you live a life of service. If you live a life of self, you usually implode because self never satisfies. And look at all the people who just totally live for them, and eventually they end up in a ditch somewhere because it destroys them. And then you look at people who use their life to make a difference, and they always found joy. They always found purpose, because money and fame itself is not enough to fill that void. Look at half of Hollywood and half of the rich, famous people that kill themselves, and they have all the money and the fame, and they're still not happy. Because I just believe that human beings are meant to serve other human beings. And when you're not doing that, you're kind of like, well, what else is there? And you keep looking for the next thing, the next big car, the next big whatever, and it kind of never fills that void. Oh. And so I just thought, hey, if I'm making a difference wherever I go, inspiring people, encouraging people, or people are enjoying my music or my words. And the reason why I really was compelled to finish Maria's Scarf was I thought, okay, I've been on this incredible journey of my life. What's the biggest way now from 60 to when I'm out of here that I can inspire people? Because one day I'm going to be dead, right? And so what will it be? Well, a book will outlive me forever. And I just did the audiobook for it. So long after I'm gone, people can be inspired by this mother, by this family, by this kid, and the people that came in his life to help him. And that's something that translates forever, right? I mean, there's that saying, mankind lives off of food, clothing, and shelter. Well, that's not entirely true. There's one thing they never talk about, the fourth thing that mankind cannot live without, and that is story. Mankind lives off of food, clothing, shelter, and story. This is why people pass down stories from generations to generations. Every religion, there's stories, writings on the wall, cave drawing. We cannot live without story. Story is how we make sense of humanity. It's where we find the commonality in the human experience. It's where we find hope and inspiration and wisdom. So if story is the thing that I can pass on, my story, what I was able to do to inspire people, what could be better? Because there's only going to be so many people I'm going to be able to meet in person, only so many concerts I'll be able to play, only so many speaking engagements I'll be able to do. But a book, that can go around the world, and an audiobook forever and ever and ever. People are still reading books that are 5,000 years old, so it's true. We live off of story. So those are, more of the deeper things that compelled me to do what I do, because I've always been a very intentional guy, always very purpose-driven, and always thinking about what's going to matter 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what's going to matter when I'm gone, And I think, look, we still talk about people's influence from thousands of years ago, whether they're scientists, whether they're doctors, people who did things that I just watched that movie about Marie Curie, and they called him Madame Curie. It was a really, the female scientist who was in charge. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have radiation where we could do X-rays and all the kind of stuff. But she worked tirelessly in her life, and she was driven just like I was with this book. But look at the difference that she made, that we're still reaping the benefits, So I look at things like that. I was always inspired by those kind of stories.
Well, I know you talked about not being a vocalist, that kind of thing, but did you, when you approached the audible portion of the book, did you find that came pretty natural for you, or did you have to really work at it a couple takes?
You guys are really good interviewers, man. I just have to say, I'm really enjoying this podcast because for two reasons. One, your questions are really deep and poignant, and no one's asked these. And you're also good listeners, because I am a person, obviously, who can talk. I mean, I'm sure some guests, it's short, quick little sound bites, and they're off. But I'm a person who has a lot to say, and you guys are letting me say it, which is great. But, yeah, that's a great question. So I actually called up Lenny Kravitz when I was getting ready to do my audio book, because he did his. And I said, so tell me about that process. And he goes, you'll be over it in about an hour, meaning it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
And I posted something on my Instagram about it like the first day, and then he called me up and FaceTimed me for a half an hour, and then he goes, how'd that go? And I said, my voice is a little shot because unfortunately I was talking in the car on the drive up to it for about 5 hours, not realizing that when you talk in a car, you're talking louder than normal because you're talking over the car volume, right, the road noise. But anyway, he said, reading it from him was really difficult because, you have to enunciate all the words perfectly, and you have to, he goes, when you're singing a song, he goes, you can sing it however you want to say the word. And he goes, he was saying this, he goes, how many Earth, Wind, and Fire songs have we heard where we don't know what the hell they're saying? you know what I mean? Because you can phrase it however you want to phrase it, right?
Oh,
but when you're reading a book, you have to. So I had some difficult passages in there that were really funny. Like I could not say Xmas Pax, Xmas short for Christmas, and it was about a passage when I was a kid. I used to sell those greeting cards, those Christmas cards, to make money, and it was like every time I got to Xmas Pax, it was a tongue twister, or welcoming him in. Things like that with a lot of H's, and so everyone has little words or phrases that'll trip them up, and it was just funny. There was a few of those bloopers, but I actually did better than I thought because I've been publicly speaking for like 45 years. Like I've been speaking for a long time. So, and I read quite a bit. So, I did, well, the producer told me, she goes, you've made less mistakes than most of the professional readers we hire. I was like, wow, really? Well, probably two things. One, it's my story and I know it. Like meaning I wrote it. So, but it still was kind of hard because I didn't get a chance to, if I had the time, I would have read the whole book before I went into the studio, but I hadn't read it in a long time. So it was still kind of like, it's a matter of your eye keeping up with it. You know what I mean? Like your eyes got to see it like a few bars ahead, so you know how to phrase the sentence. So sometimes I go, let me take that over, because I realized the sentence was longer than I thought, and then you got to figure out like where you're pausing or where you take a breath, and it's just like singing in that way. Right. But it was there was a part of me that I was like, in my book contract with Blackstone, it wasn't a guarantee that I get to read it. Which I thought was interesting, because they said, we do that because if the author doesn't have a good voice or he can't read well, then we want to reserve the right to get a very good reader. So I actually auditioned for my own book. I sent in a demo of me reading the first chapter so they could hear what my voice sounded like. And I was kind of on the fence. I was like, well, if I don't do it, then I won't have to do all that hard work for 14 days, because I knew it was going to be like brutal, amount of intensity and time. And then I said, but then if I do get picked, it'll always be my voice telling my story, and I'll never regret that. So it worked out that they chose me, and they're so excellent at what they do. And I think it came out fantastic. And then we did a little something fun at the end. We did a bonus thing where, actually, one of the most fun parts for me was reading the acknowledgments. I didn't know I would get to do that, because there's many, many people in my journey of life that have helped me, and they're all thanked in the book. So it was really fun for me to say their names. But then we put some bonus drumming footage at the end, like some recordings of me, playing drums, so the listener could go, now you get to hear him play, because they just heard this whole story about this guy. And now there's some bonus stuff with, a basketball player can't do that. So, only a musician could put on something like that on the audio. So that part's kind of fun. But yeah, it was a fun process, but a lot of hard work. But I'm not a singer, but I have a very strong voice because I've talked a lot in my life.
Oh, that's cool.
We are running out of our allotted time for the evening. Got one last question for you, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah.
So, maybe this might be a tough question for you, but this portion of your life, you're a drummer, you're an author. Are you the drummer that is also an author, or now are you the author that now drums? Or I guess maybe is also a drummer. Yeah, I guess what is the priority now? Because you wrote so many successful periodicals and books. I guess in the now, where are you? The drummer that is an author, or vice versa?
Well, I think it's half and half, and the thing is, I've always tried to figure that out, but I've realized that the gifts that I have, the gift of being a drummer, a speaker, a teacher, and a writer, I would say those are my primary gifts, right? But they're all under the umbrella of a communicator, right? Because they're all different forms of communication. I communicate on the drums, through the written word, through the spoken word, and through personal encounter. But every day that looks different. So sometimes the drummer is at the forefront, and then, like I just did a couple of TV shows in Nashville, and they had me go and play, and so I kind of never try to figure it out. I just try to go, I'm just real malleable and pliable and flexible to go, hey, right now this week I got to put the drummer hat on because I'm in the recording studio with some of the guys from Leonard Skinner, or I'm doing a track that Joe Satriani is going to play on, and I go, this is where I wear my drummer hat. And then I go in another place, I go, this is where I'm a speaker. But a lot of times when I do events and stuff, I kind of incorporate all of them. So if I go speak somewhere, I'll perform as a part of that speaking thing. I'll tell my story or some stories or have some encouraging message. So I kind of just, it's like I've got these tool bags, and at any given time, I need this tool or that tool, so I just kind of roll. So I don't know. I guess I didn't really answer it because it's kind of a mixture of all of it, and I think it always will be, because I've by no means have stopped drumming, and no means do I want to stop writing. I just want to keep expressing myself. I want to get better at all of them, honestly.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything that we left off that you would like to plug or promote?
No, just to thank you for having me on the show. And if people want to get the book, they can pre-order it now. It's just Maria's Scarf with 2 S's, Maria's Scarf. It's available where all books are sold, Amazon, Audible, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. The book will inspire them, and it'll take them on a journey that hopefully help them lead them to their own dream. But I just want to thank you guys for having me on. And if they want to look me up, it's just ZoroTheDrummer.com is the website, and it's just Zoro with 1 R, ZoroTheDrummer.com. I'm the same thing on Instagram, Zoro the Drummer with 1 R, the Zoro part. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, this is how things are going to work out. We're about 3 weeks behind on our episodes. We're also taking our wives down to Mexico next week, so we're going to be a little behind.
Nice.
But Jeff, the editing wizard over here, will get all the boogers cleaned up out of it, and then we'll send it to your PR person. We'll send it to you as well. And please share it to every social that you're a part of. We'd appreciate it.
Totally. I'll get that out there, and 3 weeks is better. Closer to the release date's even better. It's April 30th, so whenever you get it out, that's great. But thank you for having me, and you guys, your questions were really amazing. Well, this was so fun and easy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. And so just send me all the info when it's ready to post or whatever, and I'll put it on all my social, and that'll also let other people know about it too, because there's quite a few different R&B people who follow me.
Yeah.
So that'll we'll help each other get the word out.
Hey, thank you so much, Zoro.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. You too.
Everybody eyes the gun and screams inside their head. as their last goodbyes. Move to the sunshine, fight the grip of nights. If they ever take from you, then you plug out both their eyes. They roll the dice. Take your chances.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts.